Okay, in our last video, we talked about the structure of the federal court system and the different types of courts. In this video, we are going to talk about the procedures of the Supreme Court. So how they choose which cases that they're going to hear, and then that review process and the process of issuing a decision in a case. So first, the Supreme Court has to decide whether or not they are going to hear a case. So most of the cases that the Supreme Court takes on is going to be on that appellate jurisdiction. All right, so they're going to hear an appeal, and that's going to originate when a litigant who lost in a lower court is going to file a petition to have their appeal heard by the Supreme Court. So most of the cases that the court hears is going to come from the federal appellate courts and state Supreme Courts in those cases involving federal law. So the Supreme Court is going to receive between 8,000 and 9,000 petitions each year. So right around that 10,000 mark. But they're only going to hear 70 to 80 cases a year. So fewer than 100 cases are heard by the Supreme Court each year. In order to take a case, the justices are going to follow the rule of 4, okay? And that means when they decide to hear a case, at least 4 of the 9 justices have to decide to take that case. So they follow that rule of 4, voting to take on a case. And in theory, the court is going to only accept the most important cases. So those that are involving pressing questions of national importance. A lot of times they're going to have to do with civil liberties, okay? So if the court decides to hear a case, the court issues a writ of certiorari. And this is where they are going to request the records from a lower court, okay? So they want to get all of that information from those previous court decisions from the lower courts. And this process is going to be referred to as granting cert, okay? So getting those records from those lower courts where the cases were previously heard. So a decision to grant cert is going to be more likely in cases involving interpretation of the federal law, the Constitution, or a treaty. So again, a lot of times cases are going to involve civil liberties, okay? The court's often going to accept cases involving an issue that has been considered by different federal courts of appeals and in which those circuit courts have reached different decisions, okay? So in order to bring suit or file a case with the Supreme Court, a party has to have standing, okay? And what that means is there has to be some sort of significant personal stake in the outcome, okay? So they can't just file a case for no real reason. They have to have that standing. SCOTUS decisions or Supreme Court decisions are going to set a precedent, okay? And precedent is defined as a judicial decision that acts as a basis for deciding similar cases in the future, okay? So precedent means that they are going to look back on this case when deciding a similar case in a future case, okay? So setting precedent. Also, under the principle of stare decisis, the court may allow a previous decision to stand. Okay, so what this means is that when the court is considering a case, they might refer back to that precedent, okay, from a previous case that is similar, and allow that decision to stand. So they're not constantly overturning decisions. They might allow a decision from another court to stand. So that's electing to obey past decisions made by the court and following precedent. Okay, so they're not constantly overturning things. All right, when it comes to considering cases, if the court grants cert, okay, so requests those records from a lower court, it's going to request briefs from both sides, okay, laying out full arguments. So this is just going to be summaries of facts and legal arguments, okay? And then the case is going to be scheduled for oral arguments where each side is going to have a fixed amount of time to present their case. So generally this is going to be about 30 minutes, and the attorneys will make statements and answer questions from the 9 judges. Okay, so they'll all be seated like this, and they can ask questions of the attorneys during those oral arguments. From there, the justices will meet to vote in secret. All right, so after they have voted, okay, they will issue a decision, okay, and the Chief Justice or the senior justice in the majority will write the majority opinion, and this is essentially announcing the court's decision and detailing the legal reasoning behind it. So they make their decision with that majority ruling behind it, and these majority opinions are going to be binding and set precedent for future cases. Okay, so they will consider the precedent set by this case when considering similar cases in the future. So a justice voting with the majority can also write what is called a concurring opinion. So this means that they agree with the majority opinion, but they have a different reason for agreeing with it. So they've arrived at the same conclusion, but they followed a different line of legal reasoning. A justice voting with the minority, okay, can write what is called a dissenting opinion. So this does not serve as precedent. And what a dissenting opinion means is that they disagree with the majority opinion. So in the dissenting opinion, that justice will give their reasoning of why they believe that the majority is in error and sets out an alternative argument. So when the court issues a decision, it issues that majority decision that sets precedent, but the judges can also issue those concurring opinions, so they agree with the majority but for a different reason, or a dissenting opinion that disagrees with that majority opinion. All right, so moving on quickly, let's just talk a little bit about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. So legitimacy is going to be this idea that judges are impartial and all decisions are going to be grounded in the law, not in ideology and politics, okay? So we see the Supreme Court as legitimate when we see that justices are making decisions based on the law and how they are interpreting the law, not specifically on their own opinions and ideology or politics. Okay, so a court and a justice is going to be seen as more legitimate if they are focusing on the law and what the law says. Institutions are going to be considered legitimate when its decisions are viewed as worthy of respect and obedience. Okay, so we've said that the Supreme Court does not have the authority when it comes to finances or military to enforce its decisions. So decisions are going to be enforced when the court is considered legitimate and people want to follow its decisions and respect those decisions. So there have been some examples of how the court's legitimacy has been questioned throughout history, and a couple of them are here. Okay, so one would be Remember the Titans. Okay, so that movie, I'm sure most of you have seen it. It's a great movie, but it's based on a true story. And even though Brown v. Board of Education, okay, which desegregated schools, was passed in 1964, tensions regarding school desegregation were still high well into the 1970s, as we see in that movie, Remember the Titans. Okay, so this is where the court has to be seen as legitimate, okay, in order for people to respect those decisions. And in this case, people were not, weren't exactly following those decisions because we were still seeing those issues well after the court's decision had been made. Another example is Kim Davis, who is a Rowan County clerk, okay, and this was in Moorhead, so this was a few years back, okay, and she is going to refuse to follow the Supreme Court ruling regarding the rights to same-sex marriage. So she refused to give marriage licenses for same-sex marriage, okay, so she was the county clerk. And again, that was another Supreme Court ruling, okay, allowing same-sex marriage in all states. Okay, so she was not following that ruling, did not see the court as legitimate. So again, we want judges who are impartial and their decisions are grounded in law, okay? And when we do that, it is seen as legitimate, and then we aren't going to have these questions of legitimacy. And that's where we're going to stop with this video.